Welcome to the Sustainable Clinical Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Sarah Smith. I am a practicing rural family physician and the charting coach. This is the podcast for physicians and advanced practice providers who are ready to step back from the busyness of their clinical day to share ideas, question everything, and redesign their clinical day. We are redesigning clinical medicine to create sustainable clinical days and create time for our lives outside of medicine. Join us for discussions with world experts who are helping design sustainable models of clinical medicine and the physicians or clinicians who have discovered or designed sustainable models of clinical medicine for themselves. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. Today, I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Bradley Block. We met when I was on his podcast last year because he is all about kind of figuring out some of that doctor-patient relationship information and improving and more efficient consultations. So we are here to learn from you. Welcome. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Well, thanks a lot for having me. And just so you know, your episode is one of my most popular. It is, I would think that charting would be this like mundane topic but no, holy cow. Everybody wants to figure out how to do it more efficiently. And since interviewing you, I absolutely get out of the office so much faster. So I'm an evangelist. I'm a believer in the method. So I am proof that it works and it can make your life better. But that's so about me. Yeah, I'm a private practice otolaryngologist on Long Island in New York. And I'm the host of the Physician's Guide to Doctoring podcast, which, it kind of started out as trying to engineer a better office visit. And so, because for me, what I found is that my partners seem to be more efficient about moving through their schedules than me. People were able to see many more patients a day than me. And I was struggling to see like 3 or 4 an hour. And some people were seeing 5 an hour and somehow managing to squeeze in emergencies. And I had no idea. I mean, I'm still not able to keep up with that number. But my question was like, how can we communicate more efficiently so that the patient, so I can move through these visits faster without sacrificing care and maybe even improving care? What are the communications tools? And when I started my podcast, which was at this point 5 years ago, there weren't many other physician podcasts or like physician audience podcasts out there that were talking about this type of stuff. It was being discussed for salespeople, or dating was the most common one, like how to be a better communicator when you're dating, how to not be so awkward, and how to get someone to like you. And like, well, these same skills translate to the office visit, right? You meet a patient for a very short period of time, and really, it's a heavy lift. You have to get rapport with them. You have to find out you have to understand their problem. You have to examine them. You have to come up with a plan, and you have to communicate that plan to them. And there may be multiple problems during the same visit. How are we supposed to cram all that in? Make sure they understand, make sure they and they like you. That's such an important part, because if they don't like you, if you think you're a jerk, they're not going to listen. And the whole point isn't for people to love me. No, the point is to help get them better. And oftentimes that won't happen if they don't at least, find you tolerable. And
Or
so
trustworthy, or something that helps them to
exactly.
want to do what you are telling them could be worthwhile for them.
Exactly. Trustworthiness. So how do we communicate this? And so there were all these communication tools out there, but it wasn't being like, all that I learned in medical school was sit down during the visit, and the patient will feel like more time has passed. They won't feel rushed, and they'll find the visit. Like, that's all I got. Oh, and listen. Make sure you're listening to the patients. You're not listening enough. Listen. Like, what does that even mean? Listen. Like, I am listening. And yet the patients sometimes say, you're not listening. You're like, yes, I am. So like, what is really happening in those interactions? So that's how the podcast was born. And it kind of exploded from there. So it's not just communication. The stuff that I cover is also like, just all things personal and professional development, right? Like, so charting doesn't fall into doctor-patient communication. I mean, it kind of does in the written word, but it's still, how can I be the best version? I'm going to steal this from Ted Lasso. How can I be the best version of myself in and out of the exam room? So that's ultimately the goal of the podcast. It's a big goal, but as long as we're working towards better.
I agree. Like the encounter with the patient time, that patient protected time is such an important part of our work as physicians. It's not all of what we do, but it's a big piece. And there's so many components of that. So many. Like when we start in the memberships talking about the engineering of the patient encounter. I really love that. The engineering, that word, I love it. I normally say the running on time, all of the pieces towards that running on time goal is not just a 5-minute job. So
Yeah.
many areas that you could choose to go down, so many different rabbit holes to try and improve that space. So you said you started out at a point where you were seeing about maybe 3 to 4 an hour, and you were noticing your colleagues were doing it differently. So anything else about clinical medicine at that time that was bothering you about this? Or was it just simply that observation?
Well, that was also stressed me out. Like
Mm.
the fact that I had people waiting in the waiting room for me, they don't realize that. They think you're out, they think that you don't care that they're waiting. But holy cow, it gets to me so much that people are waiting for me. I just imagine that they're fuming there. And usually they're not. Usually they're not. You apologize. Hey, I'm sorry about the wait. Oh, yeah, no, I totally get it. I mean, just because the bar is low and they expect that from a doctor's office doesn't mean that it's not okay and we should be doing it better. But I mean that was all of it. I mean, it really was the running on time. But in terms of like making it sustainable, like being able to continue doing this, I mean, that was it. That was it because it just gets so stressful and unenjoyable. And when you run on time and you really feel the other thing is being able to connect better with the patients with this improved communication ability makes it more enjoyable and therefore more sustainable. So it's more fulfilling for you, more fulfilling for the patients. And then they end up sending all their family members to you and sending all that. Like my biggest referral source are the town Facebook groups. They're sometimes called like the mommy groups, but there are plenty of dads. I'm on there, plenty of dads on there. Like there's just the town groups where it's like, does anyone know a good otolaryngologist? Does anyone know a pediatric otolaryngologist? Does anyone know like I'm having this problem? Does anyone know? And like in the surrounding areas, apparently, because I don't live in any of those towns, I live a little further away. That is like I keep coming up, and that's makes it more sustainable. That is just so nice to hear that. I'm not great at taking a compliment, but it's still nice to hear that you're wanted, that you're needed. It helps you stay in the game longer.
Yeah, makes it that little bit nicer for you because you're getting that warmed audience already. They're already coming with that partial trust because they've heard it from others that they trust, that you're the guy to go see.
Yeah,
Okay, so this is
and
a win-win for you because you're now running a little closer to time, presumably, and having a more enjoyable experience. Now, that would have taken some doing. What did you do? Like you said, you went looking around in the world for some ideas. What else? Well, tell
so
us
that
about that
was
journey.
yeah, so that was the podcast. So I would look for guests, and one of the things that I think is cool about being a doctor is we're experts and all of our friends are experts. Like all of my friends from medical school are now experts in whatever field it is. Like you don't need to have written Harrison's, right, to be the expert in whatever field you're in. You are an expert by virtue of the fact that you. So it was very easy to find people early on to come on my podcast, and also my friends from college. In order to get into medical school, you had to do well in college. So my friends from college, my friends from high school, like I have all these people in my circle who are now like I'm in my 40s. They're now established and they're experts. So it wasn't hard to find people that fit the bill of helping physicians be the best versions of themselves because again, the topics were so broad. But with regards to like specifically communication during the office visit, you really wanted what I did is I broke it down into what my pain points were. Um, and one of my pain points was I like to joke around with my patients.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes I'll make a joke and it's not well received. And that, joking around helps me enjoy it and helps the patient relax a little more, helps them enjoy it. Hopefully it helps that trustworthiness. And certainly when people are more relaxed, they're more receptive to learning new things. And so they're more receptive to what you're teaching them about what their problem is. So I wanted to be able to continue. So I got someone on the show who was he was one of the founders of The Onion.
Mm-hmm.
If your listeners aren't familiar with that, just go to onion.com or the onion.com. It's like a lampoon newspaper. And I think mainly they used to have it on college campuses, but I don't know if they even have the printed version anymore because everything's online. So I had and he had written a book called and if I hadn't had a podcast, it's not like this guy's going to pick up the phone and be sure, Brad, I'll talk to you about how to be funny. He'd been no, go read my book. Title of the book is actually How to Be Funny. And then there was a sequel, How to Be Funnier, and a trilogy, How to Be Funniest. So, and his name is Scott Dickers. If you ever want to look him up, he's a great guy. It was a great episode, but it gave me a framework for being funny during those visits. Again, sustainable. Like my practice and my life becomes more sustainable if I'm able to have a good time and joke around with them. And so one of the big lessons was like, what can you even joke about? What is okay in this setting? And he had a really, really interesting phrase that was the goal of humor is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, right? So your patient is you're a doctor. They're seeing you because they are literally afflicted with something. They are
Yeah.
the afflicted. So they can never be the butt of your joke. So what can be the butt of your joke? Afflict the comfortable. Like who is the comfortable in this situation, in this scenario? Is it the health insurance company? Is it the EMR? Is it the hospital system? Is it like what is it that we're allowed to joke? What can be the butt of our joke? What is comfortable? And that, if you follow that, then you're really going to make sure that your jokes are appropriate. They may not be funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. But and you can always save a bad joke with I will stick with my Jeep. I will stick to doctoring. I'm going to keep on doctoring and I'm not going to go into stand up. Thank you for bringing it to my attention that wasn't funny. You can always save yourself with that. But it doesn't hurt
Mm-hmm.
to try as long as the patient isn't the butt of the joke. Also, you don't want your own competence to be the butt of the joke because you don't want to give them less faith in your abilities. So you never want to, you can take a dig at yourself for other reasons, bad handwriting, silly doctor, stuff like that. And corny jokes, totally fine. Not good if you're a stand-up comedian, not good if you're a professional, but the classic dad joke, corny jokes, totally fine. So yeah, so that was the type of stuff that I looked into. How to be funny, how to listen better. Like, can you interrupt your patient? Because we're always told doctors are such bad at listeners. They interrupt the patient within an average of 11 seconds of the start of the visit. Yeah, because we want the visit to move along.
Yeah.
So I had an expert on listening and I said, are we allowed to interrupt? He said, yes,
Yay.
yes,
Woo.
you're allowed. You have permission. Doesn't mean you're a horrible person. As long as you're not interrupting to give them your 2 cents, you're allowed to interrupt to direct them towards the goal. And sometimes it helps to even inform them why you're interrupting. Listen, there's something about you missed about your story there. I
Mm-hmm.
see a lot of dizziness. And they're like, so I was dizzy. And I'm like, wait. You were dizzy. That can mean a lot of different things. Like we really need to drill down on what specifically you were feeling. Were you lightheaded? Were you spinning? Did you feel like you're going to pass out, lose consciousness? Were you just like in a fog? Like, what do you mean by dizzy? Like, yes, if I do that within the first 5 seconds, I'm not a jerk, right?
Yeah.
I'm helping them tell their story. I'm facilitating the story. So, there are these frameworks with which you can, and then it helps you move things along. Right? Because you get that critical bit of information. You don't have to wait for them to finish telling their story, which may be 15 minutes later if you're not going to interrupt them before
Yes.
you can give yourself a rule like I'll give them 30 seconds or 60 seconds or 2 minutes, whatever it was, whatever. And I think that is reasonable to just let them, tell their story for a minute or two. But for the sake of the people in the waiting room, you can't let them go on forever.
Yeah. We also have some physicians who really struggle with time awareness in the room. Is that something that you have looked into or had yourself as part of this progressive engineering of your encounters?
I mean, that like I kind of get lost in what time it is, and suddenly like it's 15 minutes have passed and I don't realize that 15 minutes have passed. I think my temperament prevents that from happening, because it just, no, that's never been a problem for me. I mean, I still listen. I still have plenty of patients that occupy more of the time than I would like them to, or than is allowed, in the slot that they're in. I mean, I still run behind. I still run behind, not infrequently, but work in progress. I keep trying to get better. But no, the time awareness, because I'm sitting there with my laptop. I've got a clock on it. Um, but one thing that I'll do in order to try to move things on along a little faster is, and this is because I'm a specialist, like someone will come in and they're specifically saying like, I have a clogged ear. So I won't sit down as we're told, right? We're told like, sit down, get the patient's story. I'll sit down second. So I'll go to the sink, wash my hands, look in the patient's ear. Like, oh, my medical assistant said that you felt like your right ear is clogged. Let me take a look at that. Because if it's clogged, um, I'll clean it out. And if it's not clogged, then we might need to get a hearing test, and that can take a little time. So the faster we know that, the less wait time. And so I'm kind of explaining all that in order to move through the visit. So I don't necessarily sit down first like the textbook tells us to. Like I think Bates physical exam, that's what I was using, tells us to. So that for that time awareness, because I'm acutely aware of the time all the time to try and keep things moving.
Yeah, so you've had that as a focus. Sounds like it's come out of a lot of stress that you've put on yourself about your patients waiting and the kind of comparison of your peers and how they're kind of working through their day. And then you have this textbook that you've got to live up to, the rules for engagement with regards to an encounter. And then the permission to try something different, right? This permission giving that you've given to yourself in order to try and kind of work towards a goal of this running on time. I love this permission giving that, hang on a minute, it's okay to talk and look in an ear at the same time. Hang on a minute.
But it's that balance, right? Like, because yes, it's not ideal. I should sit down and listen to the patient's story. I'm sure that would be better, but it's a give and take. So for those patients, I'm able to move a little faster, so that for the patients that need that extra time, I'm able to take that extra time. And yes, it's I I'll try something new, with the caveat that if things don't go well, if they seem bristly at that fact, like I need to be able to read the room and know that, okay, don't they feel like they're being rushed? You really need to sit down and take your time. Oh, wait, it's not about ear clogging. There's actually more of a story here. Let's sit down. So you can, I see it like a dance,
Mhm.
you're like, you got to see what your partner is doing in order and respond accordingly.
I really like that analogy. I think that's a good one because it's helping you know that there's permission to try new things. There's permission to stop and just reset and go back to where you think it needs to be based on things you're understanding about the patient, the interaction, their body language, all of those other pieces of this encounter with another human.
I see it like sometimes like a stand-up comedian. Like we've got a
Yes.
shtick. We've got a like things that we do and processes that we have that we've honed over many years. And, sometimes the audience doesn't respond the way other audiences have. And so you've got to take a second, pause, reflect, reframe, and kind of change gears to make sure. And maybe you learn something new that you can incorporate for other patients in the future. But you've got to be nimble.
Mm, interesting. So how long did this process take you to go from where you were to where you kind of ended up now?
Still work in progress,
Mhm.
definitely. But I mean, it all comes back to the podcast. Like that's where when you host a podcast, you're basically get free coaching. You get free, you have questions, you sit down with an expert and you ask them those questions and you get them answered and you record it for other people to be able to listen to. So it's just, it's been 5 years,
Mhm.
5 years of this, you know, different iterations, coming up with new questions, trying it out, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, coming up with more questions, finding more experts. And I find them on other podcasts. I find them on LinkedIn. I find them on Twitter. And, social media is awful, right? It is making the world overall, I think, a worse place, but there are also lots of benefits to it that make the world a better place. And I've made a lot of different connections just from, you know, cruising on social media, finding people that I think have interesting things that I would like to learn, and then I'm
Mhm.
sure my audience would like to learn as well.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. It's an iterative process, and just find the people that can answer those questions.
What do you think the cost was personally to yourself when you were at the beginning? So when you were struggling in this space of less people than you wanted to get through the door and this waiting room that was overflowing with like people waiting, what was the cost? What was it happening in the evenings? What was happening about your day that wasn't your best self?
Well, yeah. So I wasn't. I'm sure I could have taken better care of those patients. I mean, if there's any plaintiffs' attorneys listening, I took amazing care of every single one of those patients. A+ care.
Of course
But
you did.
if of course, if you're under stress, like a little distracted by the people in the waiting room, right? Trying to address all of their concerns without the tools that I have now to navigate that, to know when something's going not as well as it could be, having the tools to pivot in different directions. It was just, you know, every day was stressful.
Mhm.
Every day was longer than it is now.
Mhm.
And the cost, and there was, I'm sure, a financial cost because every so often a patient will leave because they've been waiting so long, or you get negative reviews. You don't have that reputation. So your office isn't as full as it could be. So there were financial costs, there were emotional costs, and then, time costs because I'd get home late. I didn't have as much time to do other things that are not work related that I'd want to do.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So it's kind of spilling into all aspects of life. What about with your team, like with your secretaries or nurses, colleagues? Who was Dr. Block then?
I still think I was a somewhat likable person to
Okay.
them. But one of the things that I cover in the podcast is patient experience. And the theme that comes up time and time again when you talk to patients, when you talk to people who are experts in patient experience, customer service, it is staff experience. Your patient's experience is a direct reflection of your staff's experience. And the more that you care about your staff and treat them well and empower them
Mhm.
to do more and more and take on more responsibility and therefore be more fulfilled in their jobs, the better the patient experience. And so, the Brad Block then versus the Brad Block now, I'm sure is a much better person to work for. And the reason is I take more active interest in the lives of my staff. Now, it is something that I learned early on, like that was an important thing. But in terms of having the skills and the maturity to be able to exercise that, I think came later. And so now, it's important to know something that happens in some offices. There are doctors that don't know everybody's name who works in their office. What? Holy cow. Like it's important to you know about them. Ask them about themselves. Find out how their weekend was. Find out what they're doing this weekend. Is their kid feeling better? Like, what are they doing this summer? Get involved in their lives. And if you and it can even be fake it until you make it, right? Because the more you find out about them, the more interested you'll become, the more engaged you'll be. And then, and then it just builds from there. And so then once you care about them, their life improves and they care more about their work because they're working for someone who cares about them. So, you know, I guess it sounds kind of bad, fake it till you make it, but still, like, just start off, because sometimes there's a little barrier between the physician and the staff, and it's important to break that down, find out who they are as people, learn about them, and it'll pay off so much, because a lot of enjoying life is the relationships. So you build
Mm.
a relationship with these people that you spend so much time with, or maybe don't spend enough time with because they're at the front desk, so you don't even see them that much, right? So building those relationships, and then it benefits them, benefits you, and it benefits the patients and your practice, and therefore also the bottom line.
Got it. So it's when we're in that struggle of I'm stressed, I'm running behind, that's making me more stressed. I'm really worried about the patient. You're kind of lathered, you're distractible or distracted and stressed. And now your wife's on your case because you're home late and now you're getting texts from home. It's really hard to go and figure out who Sally is and what she does in her life, right? As part of your
Exactly.
staff.
Exactly.
Really, this is really super hard. So we're not saying everything will be better when you just, pause and learn who your staff are, but it's that working towards the step by step towards the outcomes that we're looking for. So now we've got you seeing, what sort of number are you seeing now an hour if you wanted to?
4,
For an
like
hour. So
a
for an
solid
hour,
4.
solid, booked,
Yeah.
running closer to time,
Yeah.
knowing who your
And
staff are.
sometimes we'll squeeze in last minute patients. So sometimes 5, but usually, there's also a no show rate. So it still averages out to about 4.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've got you still seeing the same or more patients, home earlier, enjoying your day, and have the mental capacity, not that you didn't have any capacity intelligence wise, but more that I'm not as distracted, I'm not as stressed, and now I want to learn who my staff are so I can improve this even more.
Well, because before, what was I doing at the end of the day? I was still charting and catching up on phone calls. And now I have more time to make those phone calls during the day. And because I'm done with charts at the end of the day, what do I do on my way out? Stop by the front desk, have a little chat with everybody, see how everyone's doing, seeing if another thing that you can learn from the staff, what's working well, what isn't working well. What would you like to see change? Because they're boots on the ground. They can give you some great ideas about how to work through everything better. So it's not just, yes, I have the mental bandwidth to ask about it, but before they were gone because I'd be charting for till the end of and then they've long since vacated the place.
Yeah, such a common thing, right? Like, why am I the last one here? And now I'm
Yeah.
making all the calls because my staff have gone home hours ago.
Yes.
But adding and adding and adding to non-physician work. Um, Tell us about your journey with charting, because of course that's what we do and what we talked about last time. What's different? Tell us that.
So it's just this so there's people in the waiting room, right? This clearly, it still stresses me out sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
but I have to, what I tell myself is like, either they're going to have to wait a little longer or my kids are going to have to wait a lot longer. Because if I save it for the end of the day, which I still do from time to time, but certainly a lot less than before, if I save it for the end of the day, it's like a gas and
Mm.
it fills the space it's given. And
Yes.
so then it won't take me another minute to finish each chart as it will like when I'm actively with the patient, but rather, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I'm messing around on social media, I'm dilly-dallying because I don't want to sit down and chart. So, I'm home much earlier and maybe I'm running a little further behind because I'm taking an extra minute at the end of that visit to, to close out the patient's chart before I go on to the next one. But then it's only taking me a minute and then I'm on to the next patient. And then I look at my morning and all the charts are closed and then I get to sit and have lunch. And at the end of the day, all my charts, or maybe I'll have like one or two, sometimes it's like, man, there's going to be a lot to document here. And this is going to be really time consuming. And I'm really, fine. That happens,
Mhm.
but the intentionality is there that if I have the time, and even if I don't, I know it's going to cost me so much more to do it later than now. So just do it now.
There we go. Love it. So good. It's important to have that reminder that it still stresses you out. There's patients waiting. Hear that. Remember, that's what your autopilot tells you about people in the waiting room, is that they're having a terrible time and they're getting more and more unhappy. Like, that's just autopilot. Isn't our brain amazing with the sentences it just loves to create about the patients in the waiting room for us? And we can find evidence for how that's true. And
Yeah, but it's selection bias because every time it's like I knew they were going to be angry, and actually this took me in therapy
yes.
to come to terms that, like, because I would sometimes walk in that room with fists clenched, like just ready for them to argue, and so often they'd be like, "No, I get it. No, no, no. Yeah, yeah, I'm sure you had something. Yeah, they said that you had like something really complicated before that was time consuming. That's why you're running behind. No, I get it. No, so like, oh, listen, I made the appointment yesterday. I appreciate you getting me in.
Mhm.
So I imagine this in my mind of all these angry, and in reality, it's just my anxiety speaking.
But that story, so important, because you're not alone there with the sentences and stories we create on others' behalf. We haven't even asked them. We don't need to ask them, but we haven't even asked them. We've just kind of, for the benefit of our own brains, decided on a story. And all of the stories were available. We could decide having the best time out there. They've finally got an hour away from the kids with social media uninterrupted. They're watching that movie that they've wanted to watch for years. They're finally getting the opportunity to do that. Like, all of these stories were available to us, but the one we hold on to is this dreadful story about the patient having a terrible time. They're going to write all these terrible reviews and they're going to blah, 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 blah. It's crazy what our brains just love to do on autopilot. And when we catch them in the act and say, hang on a minute, wait a minute, I hear you, brain. I know that you're stressed about that patient waiting, and I'm going to take a minute so I don't have to take 10 later. Sweet.
I love that. I love that. Recognizing that it's my brain telling me a story rather than actually believing the story,
Yeah.
reframing it.
Just that we know that our brain does autopilot because we've had decades often of practicing this. Decades of practicing, I must sit down and look at the patient for 5 minutes before I'm allowed to touch them. Like, decades of training, that suddenly there's this automated response just because we have practiced and practiced and practiced it, even practicing the story about what we think about patients in the waiting room. And then I love that you said, I took it to therapy. So important, you guys, to have many tools and many helpers in your life, right? Coaching's one of
Absolutely.
them. Therapy's one of them. Don't give them up. Very important for physicians. Who was
Yeah.
noticing you struggling right back then? Who was noticing? Was anybody, like, were you chatting to colleagues? Were you talking to anyone about, hey, I'm having a really hard time with this? You went and started a podcast. Like, that is not a small feat. I'm noticing the effort that went into this. I'm wondering the process.
No, nobody, because the assumption is that this is normal.
Mm.
This is how it's supposed to go. You're supposed to run behind. Like, you're going to run behind. It's inevitable to run behind. It's inevitable to stay late charting. This is just how it is. This is the practice of medicine. So there wasn't anyone that I was sharing this with, because this is the life that everyone was leading. In fact, the people that I saw that were able to see many more patients from me were actually in other offices. So I didn't even know how their day was going. I saw that their schedules were filled and I saw how many patients they saw, but I didn't know if they were actually running on time. I didn't
Mm.
know when they were leaving at the end of the day. I didn't know if they were happy or miserable. I just assumed that they were managing it in stride, telling
I
myself a
love that.
story.
It just, you've got a story about them. Look, they're
Yeah.
seeing 5, 6 an hour and they're just crushing it.
Yeah.
There's something dreadfully wrong with me, but I'm normal.
Yeah. And yet everyone else in my office, same. Running, trying to run on time, often not, finishing charging at the end of the day, getting home late, as if that was, that is something that nothing can be done about.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the fallacy, right?
That was the automated thinking.
Yeah.
This is how it's done. This is how everybody does it. Nothing's gone wrong here, but it's not fun. I'm not enjoying myself. And then there was a question that your brain had that led you to the podcast. Do you remember what that was?
Are there ways? Well, you mentioned the word engineering.
Mm.
And so it was, can we engineer this? That was the question. Can we bring in people who are good at social engineering? So at the time, social engineering, or at least what I understood it to be, was engineering the social interaction,
Yeah.
right? Currently, I think social engineering, if you look it up, is more like figuring out people's passwords. It's like how to break in their computer. But the way that I thought about social engineering was how to best engineer this social interaction.
Okay, so you're a physician in pain, as in I'm running behind, I'm getting home late, I'm not enjoying this, I'm really stressed out, I'm really distractible. This is just how it is. But is this how it has to stay? I wonder if this can be engineered differently, and went on a quest to do it.
And not because I knew physicians who were doing it well. I thought I knew that there were physicians who were doing it well, but I had listened to podcasts that were teaching people communication skills for other reasons. And then, well, how do we parlay this into better interactions with our patients? Right? Rather than just doing what physicians are teaching each other.
Yeah.
Are there people that are in different fields that can help us through a different lens to improve this interaction? And so I had already been listening to podcasts and then came across these topics and thought, wait a second, we can use this stuff to help us be better at what we do. But then how do I get these people in front of me? I can't just call them up and ask them questions. They're going to say, who are you? But if I have a podcast, now I can call them up and sometimes they'll pick up the phone.
So clever and so well engineered, because you got to talk to the people that you really wanted to talk to. And you got to start asking the question of, does it have to stay this way? Does it have to be this way? Is this actually the normal that we are tolerating? That it's the only way. I would do this. I would ask all my mentors, like, how do we do this paperwork thing? How do I do it tonight? They're like, come in Sunday. I'm like, no, that's not the answer. But that's the answer everybody's giving me. But that's not the answer. Can't be. But it's impossible to do it anyway, any other way. And I first had that coach say, impossible things can become possible. I'm like, what? That's not true.
And was that a career coach, a life coach? Like, who was
Regular
it that?
old life coach on a podcast I was listening to because I was wanting to learn about motivational speaking so I could talk to my medical students in a better way. I wanted to communicate fun, interesting. I wanted to be interesting to the medical students. So I'm like, I'm going to put on a podcast, never listened to one ever before. I'll just put in motivational speaker podcast, see what they do and learn from them how to be interesting. And lo and behold, changed my life. I'm like, what? 5 hours later, my brain was completely wrecked. I'm like, what just happened? She just said impossible things can become possible. Well, I got a challenge for her.
So you take someone who's completely outside medicine.
Yeah.
You show them a problem that's in medicine.
Yeah.
And then you as the physician help to kind of direct their energy and expertise in such a way that it solves that problem.
Yeah, that's right. I just took everything she taught and I applied it to what was happening in my own life.
Yeah.
And just, it's that step by step by step. This is not perfect, you guys, right? Dr. Block, Dr. Smith, we're both having regular clinical days, right? But the experience is so different because of the steps we're making in learning. How can this be different? What am I accepting right now that I want to change? And what are the steps I need to take to get towards that goal?
And if you have that mindset, that like Carol Dweck growth
Mhm.
mindset, right? Then it just continues to iterate, right? You encounter your next pain point. Like, wait a second, we write that down. That's the next thing I want to tackle.
Mhm.
And then you find someone who's an expert in it. You help them through the physician lens, and the two together figure out how to fix it
Yeah.
or at least improve it.
So if you're out there listening and you've thought of somebody that you'd love to interview, you got to send them our way. And we'll bring
Yes.
them on and we'll talk to them and we'll figure it out. So you can,
I
yeah.
actually had someone reach out to me on Instagram, and I said, "Well, what is it that you'd want to hear?" And one of the things she mentioned was mediation between peers, between colleagues, like physician, but when you have two partners that disagree on something, how do
Mhm.
you mediate that? And my answer, I have no idea, but great topic. And so now that's what I'm looking for. So this
On the hunt
feedback from our
for.
listeners,
Yeah.
feedback from our listeners is going to help us with this process.
That's right.
So let's
Help
hear it.
keep helping you. That is the goal here, is to help you in your journey. But in the process, hear the stories of people who have been trying to figure things out. So important. Well, okay. So tell us, if you are in the pain right now, you're back in your original 5 years ago, Dr. Block, you're in pain. What would you advise? What do you think would have helped you then to start the process of considering other ways? What has been helpful? Top tips.
You mean like what are some of the techniques I've learned for helping to
Could
move through
be.
patients or
Or
for like
where would you
changing my
start?
mindset?
Yeah, where would you have started if you were just struggling with running behind, you're struggling with worrying about how the patients are, you're struggling with going home late, you're just in a bad place. And you're like, okay, Dr. Block says step one
So
might be, what
so
is
the
that?
first is just recognizing that your personality and persona and what you bring to the office visit is not static. Like, you were not born with your personality. Your personality developed over time through adapting to the environment that you were in, with certainly plenty of genetic predisposition, but it's not fixed.
Mhm.
Again, Carol Dweck.
Yeah,
You can grow and you can learn to
yeah.
do things better. The things that we think of in terms of like for instance being funny. You're not born funny. It's an iterative process. You learn to be funny. And the people that seem naturally funny, it's because I'm sure there's trauma in there and that's how they deal with it, because there's often that in terms of comedy, but oftentimes it's because there was something they did when they were small and young that made people laugh. And so then they kept trying to do, and sometimes they didn't make people laugh and sometimes they did. And there were some people, but well, I tried a few times to make people laugh, didn't work. I'm therefore not funny, so I won't try it anymore. But those that did keep trying developed this personality trait of being funny, but it's not some fixed
Mm.
trait. It is learned. And so if that type of thing can be learned, then what else can be learned? Right? This is the research of Carol Dweck. We are not static statues. We are we are, you know, I'm out of escape for word. I keep using the word iterative, but like we are, that's, we are
Adaptable,
able to learn adaptable. Thank
malleable.
you. Thank you. All
We
fantastic
are,
words.
we can pick up new things and we can learn. So we can start doing things different ways. We can give ourselves permission to try something new.
And it's going to take practice,
Mm.
but you'll find these pain points, identify them, and then see what you can do to either outsource them or find ways to adapt so that they will be less painful for you.
Love it. What else? Where would they go
Um,
next?
so so like specific things that I did in addition to, um, so another thing, um, is recognizing when patients are asking the same questions over and over and you're giving them the answer, it's often because their question is something other than what they're actually asking. And so identifying, this is something that really helped me move more efficiently and giving better patient care at the same time, was identifying what I've been calling the question behind the question. So interestingly, I had a guy on the podcast who wrote a book called The Question Behind the Question, which has nothing to do with this, what I'm saying now. So what I call the question behind the question is different from what he calls. But what I call the question behind the question is that your patients have a question, but they are not either aware that it's their question, or for some reason they're not asking it. And what I see often, as an example, as an ear, nose, and throat doctor, I see globus. Globus is a feeling of a lump in your throat. Oftentimes there's nothing in their throat. It's a sensation can caused by any number of things. And what they want to hear is that they don't have throat cancer. Now, they're not going to say, Doc, I feel like I got a lump in my throat. I'm worried it's cancer. Because then your doctor's going to think you're hysterical, right? So they don't say it. They don't say it. They think it. And unless you verbalize that in the visit, they're going to leave with a very different thought than if you do verbalize it. So it's important to be like, and a question you can use to get this out. What about this worries you? What about this concerns you? What about this bothers you? And it's a way to get them to say that question. And so without that, a lot of times, I mean, listen, patient comes in with a clogged ear and I take out the wax. You don't need to ask them what the question behind the question is, but it's important to feel out the situation and see if there's something else there, and then address that. So that's one thing that I would have told earlier Brad Block to help him move things along in a more fulfilling and efficient way.
Beautiful. I love it. Anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't covered?
The last one is boundaries. Creating boundaries with your patients, which can be a fluid thing. But, you are there to serve, but at the same time, you can't give them everything you have and leave nothing for yourself. So can I add on this patient? Can you squeeze me in? Can I see you? Can I listen, if you want to be that doctor, if that's in line with your values and it's not going to burn you out and it's going to fill your cup to be able to see all of these patients who desperately want to see you, then great. But you have to make sure when you are creating boundaries, creating your schedule, figuring out who's going to be added in, who's going to be taking more of your time, what additional responsibilities you have to make sure that it's in line with your values and that it is going to be what it's going to be taking away from. For instance, if I have a patient who's in a real desperate situation, like they've got a nosebleed, they can't stop it, they're going to end up in the ER where they're going to have to wait a really long time, and you're going to be able to take care of it in I keep going back to this stuff because I'm an ENT, and I'll be able to take care of it in like 3 minutes. Come on in, I'll take care of you. We'll spare you the ER visit. But at the same time, I've got to make it to soccer practice. I've got to coach one of my kids. I want to make it in time to read them good night stories. Well, you know what? This is what urgent care and the ER is for. That patient can go there. So, you when you're making the decision whether or not you want to take on these additional responsibilities, make sure that it is in line with your values and that what you are sacrificing, that trade-off, is also in line with your values. Otherwise, you're going to let people walk all over you, or ultimately you're going to be it's going to swing in the other direction. You're going to become too selfish and you're not going to squeeze any of these patients in because you're just saying absolutely no to everything, which I think is also not okay.
Yeah. Or even just a little bit different on that. If you said yes to the nosebleed, you're not then going to say yes to their dizziness. You're like, no, we'll get you back in for the dizziness. Today we're getting rid of the nosebleed and I'm going off to do the things I needed to do. However, we're going to communicate that with the patient. But the language.
I'm glad we could squeeze you in, but
glad we could squeeze you in for this, and we'd be delighted to see you back for that.
Yes.
Thank you so much for the permission giving to say that things are malleable and we are able to try new things, that there are lots of different experts out there to help us engineer a different patient encounter, and that our clinical day can be different if we want it to be. Where can people find you? Tell us the name of your podcast again.
So it's Physician's Guide to Doctoring, and you can find it at physiciansguidetodoctoring.com. And we have links to a lot of different podcast players. It's available on everywhere you find podcasts. You're clearly listening to a podcast right now, and so it's there too. Or you could look me up, Bradley Block, and I'm on social media. You can find me on LinkedIn, Bradley B. Block, MD, or on other social media handles. I'm at Physician's Guide on Instagram and Twitter.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope that people take this in and maybe send you and myself some ideas on who we should interview to help us keep engineering this. So thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for being part of the Sustainable Clinical Medicine Podcast. If you'd like to learn more or join us to help you get home with today's work done, go to chartingcoach.ca. There you'll find all the information on the premier Lifetime Access Charting Champions program that is helping physicians get home with today's work done, with all the proven tools, support, and community you need to create time for your life outside of medicine. We would love to see you there. Until next time, thanks for listening.